Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of 9 to 5 Faith. I am so excited to be introducing one of my friends, Justin Tilghman. Justin, how the heck are you?
I'm doing pretty darn good. Thank you for asking.
You're welcome. So tell our audience a little bit about yourself. What do you do? What's up? What keeps you busy in the 9 to 5 space and beyond?
Yeah, so I'm busy. I'm real busy. So my daytime job is I work in higher education. So I'm a dean at a college and oversee a pretty large program. We have students from all over the country, so we stay busy. One of the largest programs in our state and one of the largest in the country for what we do. So we stay real busy. I got two young boys, beautiful wife. They keep me busy, a 3-year-old and a 4-month-old. So I got one that's run all over the house and one that's a potted plant. So that's giving me plenty to do. I'm fully in the superhero world right now. And I'm very involved with our church. I'm an elder at our church, Grace Fellowship. And so stay busy with that. We lead a small group Bible study, my wife and I. And then I also do life and leadership coaching. So I've got lots of pots and lots of different fires.
I love that. I love that. And I also like asking that question because I know everyone doesn't do just one thing, or at least the people I'm talking to. Y'all are, people of many talents and many different skills. So talk to us a little bit about like what a day in the life of Justin looks like and how you learn to kind of balance just all of the things, especially having kids and what that looks like and leading a small group and being in church and doing all the business things and all the work things.
Yeah. So typical day. I like for it to start at 5 o'clock. That's not happened here lately. My wife has been laughing at me, waking me up. She's like, it's not 5. I was like, I know. But because I like to do the business stuff in the morning for me, my coaching business, as far as the essentials in the morning, because that way it doesn't need into family time when I get off work. Occasionally it has to. It's just the way things are. But then it's my wife and I split the duties of getting the kids off where they need to go. My wife's an elementary school teacher, so we kind of have to. One kid goes one way to preschool, and one goes to our neighbors down the road who help us watch him. So managing that, and then in the office, managing the higher ed stuff, and I usually take my lunch breaks, and I'll coach a client on my lunch break. Try not to let that, obviously don't want that to interfere with a full-time job. And then I do some coaching at night. I try to keep that really limited, just because I try to, like I said, balance, keep that for the kiddos and the wife. And then at night it's either small group Bible study. Occasionally there's an elders meeting at church. I work with a Christian school here. I'm on their board, so occasionally we have a board meeting. But really try to keep those nights for playing superheroes, playing Hulk and Captain America, and just loving on my family, because I don't want them to get the leftovers. And so really try to prioritize that nighttime is for them. So
yeah, that's awesome. And how has that routine kind of transitioned over the years, if it has at all, of like, kind of refining the different kind of rhythm and routine that you have?
Yeah, that's great. And so it has changed, and I think it's in flux. It's different now with 2 kids than it was with 1 kid, than it was with no kids. And so like with no kids, my wife and I, I could do a lot more in the evenings. Because we had space to, we could just be in the living room together and be working on things. And I was also doing doctoral work at that time. So that gave lots of space to do all that stuff. 1 kid came along, obviously changed that. As he got older, more self-sufficient, could do a little bit more at night. My wife and I could still connect because he was going to bed. Now with 2 kids, that's totally different, which is why I was like, well, I got to put some more time on the front end of the day.
Right.
Because having 2 kids at night, having to get one in the bath and feed one a bottle, and it got to the point where, if we're going to get quality time as a family, there has to be very little done outside of family in the evenings.
Yeah.
And so it's just been the biggest thing is communicating. She and I communicating of, hey, what do you need? These are the things I need to do. How can we make that work? How can we work together so that we're both getting what we need? The kids are getting what they need, and everybody, as much as we can, is getting what they need to flourish, and the boys are getting what they need from mom and dad. So it's a dance.
Yeah.
Constant, and that's why I like balance. That idea of balance, because people think balance is like this, but it's really all right. Step in here, and
Right.
step in there, and step in here. So.
Yeah, a little bit of each way. And I mean, I am a huge proponent of like waking up early. I'm like ultra productive when I wake up early. But my issue is I'll wake up early, get what I need to get done, and then I'll fall back asleep until I have to start work. I'm like, that kind of defeats the purpose.
Absolutely.
I'll like get
I'm
up
doing that
at
all the time.
I'll get up at 4 and then I'll like be like, yeah, like going to the gym in the morning, go off, and then I get home and I'm like a zombie and I am like completely unhelpful until like 9 o'clock rolls around.
Yeah. Well, I'll get up at 5 and I'll crank out, a podcast episode for the coaching business or something like that. And then the next thing I know, my little boy's rapping on my office door. Dad, are you awake? I'm like, man, I fell asleep.
I mean, that's real
So,
life though. So, working in higher education, what does kind of like the integration of your faith look like in kind of how you carry yourself, how you do your job, and then also like what struggles do you encounter? Because I also worked in higher education, but I also worked at a Christian college. So that is a little bit different than, and also your wife is in education as well. So I'm sure
mhm.
we see a lot of the conversation where just faith is being removed from um, the workplace, but also from education and those spheres. We've seen kind of a slow transition, and then now it feels like warp speed. So, tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah. So I have always been one that um, my faith is part of who I am. I try really hard not to have a secular sacred divide in my life. Um, and I've always been upfront with that, the people I work with the students I teach. And I mean, I've had staff members, faculty members come in my office and straight up say, I know you're somebody who prays. I'm going through this. Would you pray with me? And I'm always one to say, if you ask for it, absolutely.
Mm,
Um, you do have to be careful working for a state college and my wife working in
right.
state education. You do have to be a little careful of initiating that. But I have found that people are more receptive to that than the news would make you think.
Right.
Um, and especially when they've worked with you and they know the kind of person that you are, and if you lead with it, if you work with integrity. So
Mm-hmm.
if you say I'm a believer and you make that known, and it's how you also work that way, and they can see that in the way that you
Right.
operate. They know that it's coming from a place of genuine care. It's not coming from a place of I'm trying to put something in your face. Because I've had colleagues that we very much disagree on a
Yeah.
lot of things, but they know where I'm coming from, and so when I do share something with them, they know it's coming out of a place of, hey, this is who Justin genuinely is, and he genuinely cares, and that's why he said. And the door is open for them the other way. Like, it's not just I'm Justin, I'm a Christian here, take my faith and do something with it. It's also, hey,
Right.
I want to have a genuine conversation with you. If you disagree, it makes me stronger knowing why you disagree,
Right.
and creating that space for those conversations. My wife and I will both talked about it, and again, the national narrative is what it is, but I
Yeah.
have found boots on the ground, it's different.
Mm,
There's still those landmines you have to dance around. I mean, it's just they're
right.
there, but it's not quite like. And I'm not saying that's an overgeneralization for probably a
Yeah.
lot of people, but for where I am and where she is in terms of the jobs that we have, it's not that way.
Yeah.
We do have to be careful. We do have to do a little bit of a dance with some things, and there's some things I can't initiate, but students certainly can.
Mm-hmm.
But I do what I can to make it known to students and colleagues. If you want to initiate those things, outside of me having a big fat banner that says "Here I am,"
Right.
you can
We'll
initiate that with
pray.
me. And yeah, yeah,
Yeah, for sure. And I think too, like, especially over the past few years, um, my husband, he was like a news junkie, meaning like he was always consuming the news. And it just
Mhm.
got to the point we actually like gave it up one year for Lent. And then we realized how much happier we are. And I'm like, if you just
Yeah.
like keep your head down in your community and like only involve yourself in stuff you're involved in. Involve yourself in your community and the people around you,
Mhm.
your neighbors and your family. You'll realize the world is a much nicer place than
Yeah.
what you're being told it is.
I completely agree. And my wife and I have talked about that, in that I feel like with social media and the 24-hour news cycle,
Mm,
it's almost like we're being forced to be omniscient when God never created us to be omniscient.
mm,
And we're not. It's, on one hand, we think it's great to be able to know everything that's going on when it's happening, but look at the anxiety that's caused in people.
yeah.
You're 100% right that I have learned in those moments where I've focused on where I am, where God's placed me in the community and the people He's placed me with, things calm down a lot more,
Yeah.
because those people know you,
Right.
and so they know where you're coming from.
Yeah.
For the most part, I mean, again, it doesn't fix every problem, but
Right.
like you said, the world's, when you take that more circular view of where you are, the world looks different than when if you
Yeah.
just stay on the news and social media.
Yeah, yeah. I actually had this conversation with my mother-in-law just last night. Because she's getting older, she's having a harder time kind of like navigating just like her brain and all those things that come with aging. And she's like, I think I just need to give up the news. I was like, you definitely should like turn off the news. Because she's retired and home all the time. She watches the news all the time. And she's like,
Yeah.
how do you find out what's happening in the world? And I go, if it's affecting the people around me, I'm going to find out about it. If it's not
Hmm.
affecting the people around me or myself or like my family or my neighbors in my community, then it's not really my concern. It's not, not my, battle to fight in that regard. So yeah, I totally, totally agree with that.
Yeah. And I think, there are people that God has called and equipped to pay attention to that.
Right.
And they've been called and equipped and gifted to do that. Not everybody has. And so I think the people that have that gifting and have that calling can handle it.
Yeah.
Not all of us can. And so we shouldn't be trying to step into something we've not necessarily been called or gifted to do.
Yeah. And you mentioned it a few times of just having kind of this integrity and then also having the same of like being known. And I think too,
Mm.
like as Christians, generally speaking, like we're really afraid to be known because it shows our weaknesses, it shows our flaws, it shows our mistake. But also when we're known and we are able to act out of integrity, I feel like that's where grace shows up.
Mm.
And I think that that's really cool to be hearing that, you get to do your job with integrity, but also just like being who you are and just like stepping into that is the gateway for people to come to you when they need help and support or prayer or whatever it is in that regard.
Oh, absolutely. And my wife, she preaches vulnerability and transparency and authenticity all the time. And she's so right. And I found that true here in my life, that Christians already have this stigma of having everything together. And so
Right.
people outside feel like, well, I can't step into that church, or I can't do this, or until I've got my junk together. And
Right.
I think when we are open about the things that we're wrestling with and the struggles that we have, and they see, I mean, even my colleagues, they see Justin unfortunately overreacts sometimes, and Justin can get angry,
Right.
but Justin's quick to note that and to go back and ask forgiveness. And so
Right.
Justin's a real person who gets mad and gets frustrated and can say things he regrets a lot, but he's also quick to ask forgiveness from people and quick to
Yeah.
admit that and own up to it. And so it builds goodwill with people, and they see, he's a believer, but he's a real person.
Yeah.
And and so then, I'm not perfect, so they can see, hey, I'm not perfect, so, and Justin's
Yeah.
not perfect, so, but he's following Jesus, so there must be something to this Jesus thing where I don't have to be
Hmm.
perfect.
Right. Yeah, 100%. And I think too, just like I always think of it in the back of my mind because I'm a marketing person. And so in the back of my mind, I'm just like, gosh, Christians need a PR campaign. Like Christians just need a little bit of PR help to like actually get like the majority of people like what we actually do and how we actually act. Because again, if you look big and you look at kind of the more fringe, the outside of people who say that they believe in Jesus or that they follow Christ, you're going to be like, oh, I want nothing to do with them.
Mm-hmm.
But if you just like look within your community, you're going to be like, oh, my neighbor goes to church and she's a good person to be working with, or I can go to them if I need anything, or what have you.
Oh yeah, because you've got, unfortunately, the people that get the most attention are either the people who are holding up this holier than thou attitude, or the people who say they follow Jesus, but their life looks no different whatsoever from the rest of the world. And so when they look there, they're like, you're not any different from me, so why do I need what you have?
Right.
Or they look at the holier than thou and go, well, I don't want to be like you.
Yeah.
I don't see that grace you preach.
Yeah.
And I think for those of us that try to live in the middle or are living in the middle, we
Right.
don't get as much airtime.
Yes. And that, hence why I say PR campaign. Anyone.
Yep.
I feel like this is a complete side note, but I feel like things like The Chosen, I know like some people are like super like touchy about whatever. I'm not going into that. But I feel like there's things like that are helping progress kind of this attitude of approachability in terms of not conforming to culture, but meeting culture and showing up in the places that culture is at.
Well, I mean, Jesus was human. He took
Right.
on humanity, and I think so many times we focus on his divinity, which is great, but we
Right.
forget he was a human being.
Yeah.
And you don't people, especially children, aren't drawn to humans who are stiff and stuck up and hoity-toity.
Right.
And so we don't know exactly what he was like, but we get some clues because if the kids were running to him, they don't run. I know my two kids; they don't run to people who are scary and hard and mean. So.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's been like a really cool thing to see, kind of just the intersection of those two things kind of happening.
Yeah.
So, let's talk a little bit about like your church involvement and what that looks like within your community. And you said you're on the elder board and small group or home group or Bible study, whatever you want to call it. You're doing that. So how do you kind of navigate that in terms of like, I'll give my personal experience. I'm just exhausted from the week. Like, I'll just get to like home group time and I'm like, okay, I'm like so tired. Like I could like, let alone hosting it. Honestly, that's like one of the reasons why I'm not like a Bible study host at my church is because I'm like, I do not trust my energy levels. So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. I mean, you're right. And so thankfully the elder meetings are once a month and our senior pastor, who's one of the elders on the board, is excellent at running a good meeting. And so I never feel like this was a waste of time, like anything accomplished. Like it is, he's a gifted administrator. And so that's helpful. And with the small group stuff, my wife and I talk about it. So one of our core values at our church is house church, so small group Bible studies. And we lead for all of our new members. She and I lead that portion of the new members class.
Okay.
And we tell them most weeks, if I'm being honest, we get to Wednesday night and we don't want to go. It's like we can think of 1,000 other things to do. But it's a discipline, and we have found what's helpful is we have never left a Wednesday night house church and gone, that was a waste of time. We shouldn't have gone. Right. It is really a refreshing thing. And so I think in those moments where we feel overwhelmed, it's one of those things where we know, hey, this is a commitment, this is a discipline, and we know it's for our good. And so it feels like it's going to be a drain, but God has put this in our life, and he's put our church community in our life to be a refreshment. Yeah. And really kind of like family should get the first fruits of what you got.
Right.
In my mind, that's the priority list of my family, my church family, because I'm knitted closer to them than anybody. And then the rest of everything else. And so trying to keep that priority list and that balance is helpful. It's not perfect. That's always a work in progress. And there's, like I said, there are some Wednesday nights where I'm like, I just don't know if I got the bandwidth for it, but I go and I never
Right.
regret it.
Yeah.
So I think that's the thing is for me at least is knowing it's important, and I mean I'm not patting myself on the back, but it's a maturity thing. It's making
Right.
decisions that you know are for your good, even when you don't want to do them necessarily.
Right. Yeah, for sure. And I think too, like, I mean, I just think of like two examples came into my mind of like, okay, like going to the gym, right? But then I'm like, okay, some days I'm like regretting going to the gym. Like, so that's probably not
Yeah.
the best example. But like on the other side, like just going to like more so like weekend church for me is where I require that discipline. And I do just tell myself the same thing of like, you never go and have a bad time. Not that I'm like looking for
Mm-hmm.
like a good time, but like you know, you always walk away and you're like, oh wow, like that was like actually good and actually helpful. And like I think too, like even if you don't get anything out of it. I know that's like a weird way to say like going to church. But even if like you still walk away in like a rotten mood, like it's still exercising that muscle of discipline like you were saying.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
And I think
absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, and I think too like it goes hand in hand with like the authenticity piece cuz I'm like when my small group was meeting, I'm like if I feel like wearing pajamas, like I'm going to wear pajamas because me wearing pajamas and being with this group of people is better than me being in pajamas at home by myself. Like that cuz that is what the Lord has called me to do.
There you go. Yeah, I'd agree. And I like the idea of the muscle. Like one guy in our small group one Wednesday night, he made a great point. He said, you know, sometimes you just have to let the emotions take a back seat
Mhm.
and do what you know is needed. Um, and what you're doing, like you just said, you're working that muscle. So you're storing up treasure, if you want to call it, but you're
Right.
storing up. Um, it's paying to your account, and so it's some days you feel it, some days you don't, but you know you need to do it. And so,
Yeah.
like you said, and in that way, it is like a gym, like no pain, no gain.
Right.
um,
Right. Yeah, and I think too there's this element I can't remember what it was. But I went to church and there was a sermon or something and I was like listening to it. Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. There was like this like big like worship thing. It wasn't associated with a church or anything, but it was like really just to draw in kind of new believers and like, you know, that was the message, not that it was antithetical or heretical in any ways. But I was sitting there and I was like, you know, like I'm not like really getting anything out of this. Like it's not like but then I was sitting there and I was like debriefing this with my husband afterwards and I was like, you know what? That message wasn't for me tonight. Like
mm,
not that it wasn't like my taste or anything. It just like what that pastor was speaking on stage, those words weren't meant to be spoken to me. They were meant to be spoken to
mm-hmm.
someone else in the crowd.
Yeah,
So, you know, just having that mindset of like they were preaching Jesus and I felt it. I'm like, yes, I agree. I agree. But I already got Jesus. Like we good. And yeah, I'm like, these words are meant for someone here. And it's not me, but I'm still here participating as the body of Christ. And that is what we were called to do.
yeah, that's a great way of putting it.
Yeah. And sometimes it's hard. And I think that's where the authenticity comes in of you have to show up in your pajamas, show up in your pajamas.
You're right. You're real people, and Jesus calls real people, and you're not doing anybody any favors by putting on a facade. So,
Yeah. Yeah, and I think too, like, being that person to your community allows other people in your community to be that person to you. That's, like,
mm-hmm.
one thing I'm really big at, like, my house and stuff, where I'm like, if I were to walk into your house, I want to be comfortable. I want to be able to take off my shoes and maybe curl up on the couch and like that's just me. I don't want to be I remember growing up and there would be like these houses that were like museums and they were so unapproachable and like you didn't want to touch anything because like it was white couch and you didn't want to get fingerprints. And I'm like, I don't want that to be my house. And so like when people come over to my house, I'm like, help yourself to whatever you want. Cabinets, there's the water, there's the food, there's the drinks. Go get whatever you need. Help yourself. Don't even ask. Just go and get it. Because if I'm invited into a home, that's kind of how I would want to be treated. And having that
Mm-hmm.
vulnerability and ability of like, if I have to wear pajamas one day to small group, because that's just where you're giving permission to other people to be their authentic selves, is what I'm trying to say in a
Yeah,
very
that's right.
long-winded
And
way.
no, you're right. And I think, I mean, authenticity breeds authenticity. And so when one person does it, it does give other people the space to breathe and go, okay, I can be me. And
Right.
that's where real connection and real change happens, when people start doing that.
Yeah. Oof. Yeah, that's true. Because I think too, like, if we have just this facade kind of going into everything, then yeah, it's authenticity breeds on 100%. Because if people have like a really good BS radar, and if you're not being real with them, like they can tell that you're just like putting on face. And I think that,
Mm-hmm.
you know, when we're able to see past the masks, we're able to really come together and like actually grow and actually, foster growth. And there's another word that I'm trying to think of that just like kind of escaped from my brain, but yeah,
Well, that kind of goes
accountability.
back to like what we were talking about earlier of the, your local community looking different than what the news tells you, because you're looking at the mask that everybody's supposed to be wearing,
Mm,
regardless of what
yeah.
political side you're on. This is the mask you're supposed to wear. When you get into community with people, regardless of where they are on a political spectrum, a
Mhm.
social spectrum, whatever, you
Yeah.
start talking to people, you realize we're a lot more human than they're
Yeah.
trying to make us think we are. And so we can actually have a conversation, and we can be from totally opposite sides of
Mhm.
whatever the issue is, and realize we can still talk to each other.
Right. Right. And I think too, it's like, this is off topic a little bit, but like looking at intentions, like that's one thing that I
Mm-hmm.
really try to look at when I'm talking to someone. And even in my relationship with my husband, I think like if he does something to upset me, I say, okay, is he purposefully doing that to upset me? Probably not. Like, probably not. So can I be mad at him for upsetting me? No, but then there's like the communication and their growth opportunity and everything like that. And I think too,
Mm-hmm.
like when we look at just whatever issues you want to pull, I'm like, okay, like we all kind of want to get to the same end result, but how we get there is very different. We're arguing about the path there. We're not arguing about the journey, because if we're arguing about, or sorry, yeah, we're not arguing about the destination, because ultimately we all want to love on each other. We all want to be supportive. From a Christian perspective, we all want people to be following Christ and be able to spend eternity with him. But the path there is where the disagreements kind of come in, and I think that's what everyone
Mm-hmm.
just attacks the path.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. I hadn't thought about it that way.
Yeah, and when you look at things through that lens, it just like softens your heart a little bit, in my opinion.
Well, it reminds me of the verse that, where Paul says our battle's not against flesh and blood.
Mm,
And so the person sitting in front of you is not your enemy.
right.
Um, and so when you remember that, like you just said, it softens your heart a little bit, and you realize this is another person,
Yeah,
and they've got hopes, dreams, feelings.
right.
Um, and so being mindful of that is helpful.
Yeah. So let's talk about like that in like the students that you work with, and like do you have any like examples of just really seeing God's hand and his provisioning over what you do every day?
Yeah. So I teach online mostly.
Mm,
And so what I have found, I've had students that I knew from the community. I've also had students who were not from my community. I've had students that were believers and were openly sharing that. I have students who were not and have openly shared that. And um, for me in the classroom, like really trying to model for them what I do with my colleagues. Like, hey, we can, because to me, that's one of the things that we've lost the ability to do is to interact with people we don't agree with. And so modeling that for them, showing them what that looks like to respectfully disagree and to share your thoughts, opens up a lot of doors. And I just think God has been gracious in my classrooms, to, for whatever reason, make them spaces where folks have felt safe, to share things that have been tough. I've gotten emails from students saying, hey, I know I was out last week. This is why. And I'm like, man, thank you for trusting me enough to share that with me and not just saying, I'm going to be out. And so, and trying really to see that as, again, talking about the secular sacred divide, this calling to teach. I mean, I do teach. I teach at a couple of different places outside of my full-time job. I've got some adjunct jobs, but so I teach at a Bible college where I do get to teach theology, and the students are typically right there with me.
Right.
But my daily job teaching is not at a Bible college, and it's not in a theological background or anything like that. And so seeing both of those as a calling from the Lord and a trust from the Lord, in that these students He's given to me, while yes, they're mostly adults, they're his creation, they're in His image. And so I might get to be, I hate to use this cliche, but I might get to be the only Christian that they interact with, or the only Bible they read, is what a lot of people say. And so really trying to be mindful of that, and how can I exhibit a Christ-like heart here, and come across in a way that's firm, in the sense that we've got rules we have to follow. We have a syllabus we have to follow, but where in that can I show grace, even if it doesn't look like Christian grace, but where can I show some grace and say, hey, look, life happens. I know the syllabus says this, but I'm going to exercise some grace here. And it's not related to being a Jesus follower or anything, other than it comes from that heart of grace. But that has opened up doors. Like, man, nobody's ever done that for me before. I really appreciate that. And that opens up an opportunity to share, well, this is why I do that.
Yeah, for sure. And I think too, when you're talking with students, especially like generalizing, I know there's like a lot of adult learners, but just they're in this like super formative part of their life, like entering into college. And I think too, like, yes, you might be the only person who shows them Jesus, but also you may be planting seeds that you don't even know that you're planting. And I think that's like, I don't know, an encouragement I want to give to anyone who's listening, of like, if you feel like you're not seeking or like reaping the harvest, like you may be planting something that is years, in the making. And that is your opportunity to kind of speak Jesus in that place. Even though it might not, I guess, like convert in a really quick way. I know that's like I'm not saying like convert in like a Christian sense. I'm saying like convert in a marketing sense, because that's how we talk, but also it kind of works.
Yeah, no, I think you're exactly right. It's you don't know, to use your journey metaphor from earlier, you don't know where that person is on their journey and what part you're playing. And I think so many times you just think about evangelism, especially in the workplace, because I've wrestled with this. If I'm not blatantly sharing Jesus in every conversation, I'm not doing what I'm called to do. And that's not true. Scripture plainly says, some plant the seed, some water, some get the harvest, but God's ultimately doing the growth. And you don't know what role you're playing in that.
Right.
And he might not be calling you to do the seal the deal thing at the end.
Yeah.
He might be calling you to plant the first seed of, why did he act differently? Nobody's ever treated me like that.
Right.
And you didn't even say Jesus' name. You just treated them differently.
Right.
So you're right. You don't know where you are in that process. So I've tried to remind myself, and I would encourage anybody listening, don't beat yourself up if, well, I'm not witnessing more at work. Don't just have such a narrow definition of what witnessing is.
Right.
Expand that definition to, you might be witnessing, but you don't even know you're doing it.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And I think too, there's this piece where someone said this to me, and it really humbled me in the moment of like, you might be on this earth for that one person. Like that
That's
might
good.
be your only job, is one person. And you don't know who that person is, and you're just moving through your life, and maybe it was just a seed dropped with this one person. And like, maybe that's all God wants to use you for. And you're like, oh, like, hopefully, there's more going on. And like, do I believe it's just like one thing and it's not a one and done thing? No. But also, like, I think it gets us to pursue excellence in everything that we're doing, and
Hmm.
really knowing that like God doesn't need us, he chooses us.
Mm. That's good. And you're right. I think we get so bent up, even ourselves in performance. Like, what am I doing? What am I doing? What am I doing? Am I doing enough for Jesus? Am I doing enough? Am I measuring up? And the good works He's prepared in advance for you to do, the Scripture plainly says He's going to lead you into them. And so,
Yeah.
just follow Him and be authentic and be the person He's created you to be, and let Him deal with the work.
Yeah.
Um, plant the seed, water where you can. If you get to reap the harvest, great. But we've all got a different part to play,
Yeah.
and you're right. Yeah,
Yeah.
don't get so bent out of shape if you're not doing what you think you should be doing. Like you said, you don't know what part you might be playing,
Right. I
and
remember.
it might be that moment where you think I didn't do anything right in that situation, and that
Right.
might be the very situation where you did exactly what you were supposed to do.
Right. I remember when I was in college, I was applying for like a summer job at this like Christian camp. And I was like going through the application, and there was like one question that like really rubbed me the wrong way. And I'm just like realizing how like I don't know their intentions of, again, intentions. I don't know their intentions of putting that question on the application, but it was like, please detail the last time that you led someone to Christ. Like
Mm.
like very specifically, like, and I was like, you know what, like for me, that was like it, like younger Paige was like off-putting. I'm like, I've never done that before, because I hadn't. But it doesn't mean I wasn't ministering to people throughout my life.
Mm-hmm.
I might have just not been there for that turning point,
Yeah,
or or I didn't know that they had a turning point or what have you. And so yeah, that was like really weird, where I'm like, like I don't know how I
yeah.
feel about that. But also, like,
Well,
we don't.
it goes back to it goes back to that gifting thing. Like,
Yeah.
you don't know. Like, that might not be the Lord might not be putting you at that point in my journey because you're just not gifted in it. I don't know.
Right.
I mean, I'm
Yeah.
not saying you as
No,
Paige,
no,
but
no.
just
I
a general
gotcha.
view of, you might be an excellent planter. You
Yeah.
might be an excellent waterer. You might be an excellent harvester. Who knows? But just trust that the Lord
Yeah.
uses all of us, and
Yeah.
He's going to use you exactly where you. Yeah, I've seen those questions before, and it racks my brain. I'm like, man, I don't know how to. I know how I can fake an answer, but
Right.
I know how to do that. But I mean, goodness, if that's what you're defining as leading someone to Christ, then man, I don't know.
Right. Yeah. I know I am not a good waterer, because in a very physical sense, I'm growing a garden right now, and everything is on a timer, because if it's not on a timer, it's not going to happen, and those seeds are going to die.
But
Yeah.
that's why I'm thankful for the reminder app on my phone.
Oh, yes, yes. I have, okay, this is very much off topic, but I have a like smart watering system. Like it's this little
Oh,
box, and it connects up to your hose, and there's an app for it, and it's solar powered. So like you don't have to charge it up or anything. So there's an app that connects to your location, and like, so if there's a freeze warning, yes, we get freeze warnings in
mhm.
Arizona still. It still gets that cold. Freeze warning if it's going to rain, if there's going to be multiple days of rain, so you can set your watering schedule, but if it's like raining in the forecast, it will skip the day for you.
Oh my goodness. I need to get hold of that. I need that
Is
for my garden and for my
Oh
chickens.
my gosh, it is magical. Like it'll skip it for you. You can set the timer. So right now it's summer, so it's like every morning at 6 a.m. it goes and waters my garden for 5 minutes. But if I ever need to change that, all I have to do is do a little app on my phone. It is my absolute favorite thing in the world. Anyways.
There's an app for that.
There's an app for that, and that is why I'm not a waterer. I might be a planter.
There you go. You're gonna plant seeds.
Yes, I should be pretty good at that. So, in talking about authenticity and vulnerability, I like this question because I feel like it kind of opens the doors for us to like just be real for a second and like really talk about, where we struggle in terms of like what our faith disciplines look like, whether it
Mhm.
is attending church, participating in a community, serving, discipleship, whatever it is. So, like, which one of those is most difficult for you to apply to your life? And why do you think that like it uniquely applies to people who work 9 to 5s?
For me, it's a disciplined quiet time. Like
Mm.
that's, and I hear a lot of people say that, but it's
Yeah.
true. And I think it's because, time is it's so hard to balance it and manage it. And I think too, when we go into our quiet time, feeling like every time I go into it, I've got to come away with this massive feeling of just the spiritual feeling. And so when
Right.
we don't get that feeling, when we beat ourselves up, and it's much easier the next time to go, well, I'm not getting anything out of this, so I'm just not gonna do it. And and so that's been the biggest thing for me of having to reframe my mindset, kind of like the
Mm,
house church thing of
right.
sometimes God's going to meet me in this spot in a way that I'm going to feel it.
Mm,
But sometimes it's just the act of me being present with him, whether I feel
right.
something out of it or not. And so that, yeah, that's the hardest thing for me, honestly, is
Yeah.
that quiet time, and then translating that into devotions with my family.
Mm,
I know that's important, but it's a struggle. Like it's a struggle to find time to do that.
yeah.
When I come home, I'm playing with the boys, I'm talking to my wife. Just being flat honest, the last thing I think about sometimes is sitting down and having devotions as a family. I know I need to,
Right.
but it's a struggle to do those
Yeah.
two things for me, because I feel like I've got so much time and I get so busy, and it's so easy to put other things in the place of that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, it's one of those things that, going into it, it feels like a drag, but, walking away, you're just like, oh, okay, like, it wasn't that bad. For me, especially with quiet time, um, it's most difficult also because we have a lot of inputs. If you think in our lives,
Mm-hmm.
we're constantly, there's some crazy number, like we see like 8,000 advertisements a day or something like that. We are constantly being bombarded with information and things that want our attention, right? Like Netflix, my computer, like there's an ad on my computer right here, my work laptop. It's staring me back in the face right now. Um, or like if I were to open up my phone or like, here's a good ad, my favorite seltzer from Trader Joe's. Like, you know what I mean? Like everything is just vying for my attention. And it reminds me, and it's a little shiny object syndrome for you, reminds me that I need to go pick up more of these delicious seltzers from Trader Joe's. But everything is vying for our attention. And what we're called to do when we step into time with God is to shut everything down and just like focus
Mm-hmm.
on him and him alone. And I think that's why it's like really, really hard. Especially like in our culture with our smartphones and all that stuff.
Yeah, and I try to. I've implemented a little bit of a practice in my life, and with my coaching clients, I try to do the same thing with them. Of I know it's convenient to have the Bible on your phone and to have a journaling app
Mm,
on your phone, but don't let that be where you do your quiet
yes.
time, because it's so easy, like you
Mm-hmm.
just said, for that notification pop up. And I'm like, if you have to do it, put your phone on airplane mode. That's what I try to
Yeah.
do, because that way at least nothing's hopefully coming in.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, because you're right, because the culture around us does not promote intentionality. It doesn't promote
Mm-hmm.
authenticity, and it doesn't promote quiet.
Yeah. Yeah. One trick that I like to do, because I'm the same way where I love having kind of like my physical books, one, because it doesn't allow me to go through web browsers or anything. But another trick that I like to tell people to do is like if you find yourself like mindlessly scrolling or like just going and logging into an app, rearrange your apps and then you won't
Oh, that's
mindlessly
good.
go. You might
because
you
you got to
won't
find the thing.
because you have to go find it. And then you're like, wait, why am I trying to find Facebook? Why am I trying to find my email? And you're like, oh wait, I'm not trying to do that right now. So just rearrange your apps and you're set.
Well, if anybody out there is listening, it'd be awesome if they created an app where you could press that and it would automatically rearrange your app
Oh,
for you.
that exists, like app shuffle. And it'll just like
Yeah, yeah, something like that where because that's a great idea of
that is
switch
a
them
really
around,
good
but it's like
idea.
you got to take time to do it, or set like a feature in your phone where every 5 days it
Yeah.
automatically rearranges your apps
Oh
so
my
that you have to
gosh.
find it again.
That's such a good idea. Now I'm like wanting to Google that and like see if that exists. And if it doesn't, any software
If you don't,
engineers
as I say,
listening, go out there and build it. Credit the
yeah,
wonderful Justin. uh Great idea. So to kind of wrap us up here in our time together, this conversation has been so amazing, but I always like to leave our audience with one thing that they can walk away with, one discipline or faith practice that they can implement into their lives this week to help them grow their relationship with Christ. What would it be?
yeah. I would say it kind of goes back to what we were just talking about with authenticity, and
Mm,
I would encourage you. You know, I love that discussion we had about planting seeds and watering, and I think a lot of folks who are in 9 to 5s, especially if it's not an overtly Christian environment, I think we struggle with: Am I witnessing enough? Am I being a good example for Jesus? If I'm not if I haven't whipped out a gospel tract with somebody, have I done what I'm supposed to do? And I would just encourage you: learn to be authentic. Don't be afraid of being who God's created you to be. Don't be afraid of the strengths that you have, and don't be afraid of the weaknesses that you have, and learn to
mhm,
be authentic with people. Try to start doing that because you don't know where you are in that person's journey.
mhm.
um, Sometimes, like I said, sometimes the seeds I have planted, and people have told me this, sometimes the seed I planted was I got angry and the way I responded
Right.
after that angry episode was the seed that was planted.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so if I was too busy trying to act like I had it all together, I'd have never planted that seed in that person's life. Now that doesn't mean go out and purposely do something you shouldn't because you want to plant a seed, but understand that God is much bigger than we give him credit for, and he's designed you and created you. And so when you are being authentically you, you're being who he's created you to be. He's using you how he wants to use you. And so
Mm,
that would be my big takeaway and encouragement: is
yeah.
don't be afraid of being authentic and being who
Yeah.
you are.
Yeah, I had this verse just pop into my mind. 2 Corinthians 12:9, and it's your strength is made perfect in my weakness. And that is exactly
Mm,
what you just said there of like people, the seed was planted for people to know Jesus in your weakness because they
yep.
saw God show up.
Hmm.
Gosh,
That's great. Yeah, you're right.
all right, Justin. Well, where can people find you? Where can they connect? Can they learn more about you? And any links that you do mention, we will have them in the show notes down below.
Yeah. So I'm on all the socials. Justin, you can look up just Justin Tilghman. If my coaching stuff, which is kind of what I do a lot of, is it's balanced coaching and consulting. And so I'm on Instagram as the Balanced Life Coach. I'm on Facebook as the Balanced Life Coach, and my website is balancedcc.com. And that's where I park a lot of stuff. Got a blog up there. I've got a podcast on how to live a more
Awesome.
balanced life. So yeah, that's where I hang out on the
Awesome. And
interwebs.
do you have a niche for your coaching? Like if someone's listening to
Yeah, so
that
it's
and
around it's around life purpose, core values, and aligning those things. So kind of what we talked about today, like who's God
yeah,
created you to be. And
yeah,
I found most of the time people's anxiety and frustration and lack of fulfillment in life is because they're not living into who God's created them to be. They're not taking the time
mm,
to find out, what do I value and who am I created to be, and does my life line up with that?
yeah,
And so I do a lot of work with mainly a lot of work with clients, whether they're just whether they're leaders or not, helping them start to live and lead out of who God's created them to be, and found that they
awesome.
oftentimes when they do that live much more fulfilling lives.
Yes, yes. Awesome, Justin. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate all the wonderful words that you had to share, and where we're at in the harvest, we might not know.
You're right. Well, Paige, thanks for having me. It's been a lot of fun.
Thanks for joining us. If you liked what you were listening to, make sure you subscribe and hit those 5 stars, and we'll catch you on the next episode.